My friends, one of the hallmarks of our congregation as laid out by Rabbi Wise, our first senior rabbi, may his memory be for a blessing, has been an involvement and engagement in the community, and understanding that our congregation needs to be a place whereby we have people who not only serve the congregation but also understand their obligation to be involved in the broader community. One of the clearest manifestations for us as a congregation of our involvement in the community is Jewish Federation. Quite frankly, we own that organization. We have so many members who are either involved in, supportive of, and committed to the Federation, or who work for the Federation, be it in the city or in the valley, that it allows me to occasionally be in the situation that I am right now. See, most of the time when I interact in the Jewish world, I am the professional, and everyone I'm dealing with is the lay person. But when I go to Federation in my other role, not as the senior rabbi of this congregation, but as the president of the board of rabbis, they're the professionals, and I'm the lay person. And what's wonderful is that occasionally, well, actually not even occasionally, quite frequently really, I come across professionals who show me, as a lay person in that moment, how I need to be as a professional when I'm back here. Dr. Beryl Geber is one of those people. She is the head of the Synagogue and Rabbinic Initiative as part of the Jewish Federation's strategic initiatives to seek help for and provide support for the Jewish community as broadly as possible. And in that role, she is my professional and I am her layperson. And from her, what I have seen is that a professional like her, acting with grace and compassion, patience and insight, can achieve so very much, both for an organization and for the Jewish people. For those are the qualities that she possesses. It is a pleasure to be able to share the bima with her this morning.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody, and congratulations to Nathan and his family for a wonderful, wonderful bar mitzvah experience for us all. When my son was very young, about 7 or 8, we were still living in London, and he brought home an interesting assignment. He was at a boys' public school, which in England is a private school, but then they do drive on the wrong side of the road. And the boys had every day a proper hot lunch together in the dining hall. And he had clearly misbehaved because he had to write out the musts and the must-nots of eating at the table. There they were, in his own words, his actions admitted to and condemned. You must not punch over the table, nor kick under the table. You must not hide your spaghetti behind the radiator. You must not chew on your tie as if it was better than the real food. Don't shoot peas across the table. The image was irresistible, but the end was what brought this delicious testament to boyhood to mind. It read, "You must have good manners, because manners are all about not harming or offending other people." As I studied today's Torah reading, Mishpatim, rules, I was reminded of this admonition. Don't do things that harm or offend. Don't do things ultimately that diminish the dignity of another or deny the spark of God with which each person is endowed. Now, how do I get this out of the listing of rules, some delivered in fine detail, that constitutes the subject matter of this parasha? I must admit that on first reading about slaves and about oxen and about asses, about deliberate or accidental harm, I remembered why I never studied law. It was tedious. I diverted myself by counting the number of times that Moses went up and down the mountain, until Rabbi Bernhardt told me not to worry about that, and to focus on the message of Mishpatim, rules that were given to people, to our people, at the same time as the Decalogue, as the Ten Commandments. These are rules of significance, of importance. It's essential to understand the context within which these rules and these laws were given. The fact that they were both a legal and an ethical expression of a people living at a particular period of human history. People who had recently been taken out of slavery and were grappling with the terrors and the joys of freedom. It is for this reason, according to former Chief Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, that Mishpatim begins with laws relating not to worship, but to slavery. After enduring the shame and the torment of being under others' control and jurisdiction, it's important to understand how to behave towards those who are enslaved. And so the very first admonition starts with, when you acquire a Hebrew slave, he shall serve for 6 years. In the 7th, he shall go free without payment. But why not abolish slavery altogether? Why not simply outlaw it for others so that they don't have to have the experience from which they, the people themselves, had just been liberated? If God did not want to see people suffer from the indignities of slavery, why not just declare it to be gone once and for all? For Rabbi Sachs, the reason is to be found in the tension between what is and what ought to be, and the truth that if people are to be really free, they have to choose freedom for themselves. It is dependent on the exercise of free will, the fact that we are not automatons, but are able to reason and hopefully choose to do the right thing. According to Maimonides, God can change nature, but he cannot or chooses not to change human nature. And Judaism is built on the principle of human freedom. We ourselves had to determine that a system is wrong and change it, not God. What Mishpatim does in the case of slavery is to encase it in a structure that mitigates its worst offenses and ensures that at least for Hebrew slaves, there will be the option of freedom at the end. This emphasis on free will is evident in other parts of the parasha as well. I was a social anthropologist at one stage of my career, and it's interesting that the concept of an accident or of a chance occurrence is absolutely missing in the cosmologies of many tribal African societies. In most traditional societies, human causation is assumed to be behind any ill fortune. If someone dies unexpectedly or experiences a disaster, it's not because of chance or accident. If I'm sitting under a tree and a branch falls on my head, it's not because of a force of nature, but it has been caused by someone, that it is the design of a real person. Why was I under that tree at that moment when that branch decided to come down? It was because someone made it happen. The solution to this problem is to get a witch doctor or a diviner who will come and root out the one who has caused harm and punish him or her. And the lines of tension within the social structure are related to who is selected to be the bad person. It could be a co-wife in a polygamous family. It could be somebody who wants the money that I'm competing for. It could be anybody who bears me ill will. These numerous lines of fracture explain all bad things happening. But they also form this assumption also acts as a social control. The message is, don't harm me because I or an ancestor will turn on you in unexpected ways. You will be sick, you will have an accident, someone will die. It's a very different cosmology from that of Mishpatim. In the verses of Mishpatim that deal with murder or manslaughter, there is a clear distinction been actions that are intentional and those that come about through an act of God. For intentional homicide, the punishment is manifestly clear. It states, "When a man schemes against another and kills him treacherously, you shall take him from my very altar and put him to death. But if he did not do it by design, but it came about by an act of God, I will assign you to a place where he can flee." The difference is clear. People act with purpose, out of free will, but things that impact us can come about without human intent, through the force of nature, through what we still call an act of God. This notion that we can control our own actions, that we're able to forswear doing things that harm others, is at the basis of the rules of Mishpatim. We can do things that cause disastrous outcomes, kidnapping, murder, striking parents or slaves, and these actions are deliberate and there are consequences that result from them. And these consequences can be dire for the actor. But there are also things that happen without intent, that are accidental, that we didn't mean to happen, that are not willful. And there needs to be some form of retribution of this, but it is much more based on the actual outcomes of the event. So that in addition to a whole listing of the must-nots, not to do with spaghetti, but to do with how to treat other people, that things that we have to clearly forswear, Mishpatim does not only leave us with things of negativity, it also is very clear about what we ought to do. When you encounter your enemy's ox or ass wandering, you must take it back to him. When you see the ass of your enemy lying under its burden and would refrain from raising it, you must nevertheless raise it with him. Clearly, there has to be some sort of context to the reading of laws and regulations that were delivered to a people assembled at the foot of the mountain. We're not dealing with a modern society. We're reading rules that constrain the actions of people living at that period of history. But underneath the stipulations are expectations about actions that allow people to live in communities with neighbors and with strangers and with conflicts between parents and children. The rules handle issues of economics, of isolation, of poverty, of punishment in a way that is humane and thoughtful of others. If you take your neighbor's garment as a pledge against a loan, you must return it to him before the sun sets. It is his only clothing, the sole covering for his skin. In what else shall he sleep? The message is clear. We are instructed to be compassionate, considerate beings, obedient to laws that give a structure to our communal life and enable us to live in relative harmony. We need to be mindful of the needs of others and take care for the least among us. We're not instructed to worry about the rich man, but about the rights of the needy in a dispute. We need to remember that we were strangers in a strange land and not oppress those who were strangers in ours. We need to be aware of the treatment meted out to widows and orphans, for if they are ill-treated, ultimately the consequences will be dire. We hear in all of these rules the foundation for the preachings of the prophets, railing against those of us who have forgotten the essential values on which we should be building our society. And how wonderful it is that a people just freed from 400 years of enslavement should receive laws that lift them from subservience and degradation into a place where they can be concerned for others and be the recipients of a sophisticated, selfless social compact. We are privileged to live in freedom and not to have to endure the desperation that others have experienced, both historically and within living memory, or that so many people are still experiencing in our own country and elsewhere. Living with that freedom, however, and knowing that we are gifted by our Creator with not only freedom but free will, how much greater our responsibility to feed the hungry, to take care of the devastated, to heal our society's wounds. As our rabbis here at Adat have emphasized, this is what we as a congregation and as a community are charged to do. It is this that we need to teach to our children, so that they continue on a path of goodness that we prepare for them. And it is to this end that we need to turn our moral indignation and concern when the world is out of sympathy with the unfortunate. To return to Rabbi Sachs, it is free will and freedom itself that allows us to close the gap between what is and what ought to be, to bridge the tensions inevitable in a complex world. We cannot just hope for good outcomes. We have to work for them. This needs to be more than just a hope. It is a moral imperative, and it is demanded of all of us to close the gap between the dream and the reality, between the ought and the can. There was a wonderful item on the BBC many, many years ago when we were in the middle of the war of attrition between Israel and Egypt. The reporter was speaking from Cairo, and he said, "The Egyptian Air Force has just reported that it has knocked out 5 Israeli jets in combat." Then there was a pause, and the commentator added, "You should understand what this actually means. It doesn't mean that the Air Force actually destroyed 5 Israeli planes. It means that they fought harder than usual, and they ought to have knocked out the planes from the sky." We cannot afford to live in a world of fantasy. We're responsible for ensuring our actions that they bring us closer to the end for which we are striving. Beyond the detail of the rules of Mishpatim, there is a guide for living well with one another in a caring and just community. We are so lucky to have been the recipients of such foresight and wisdom, laying the foundation for our obligations as a people of the covenant. Let us cherish and renew that heritage. Shabbat Shalom.